Hi everybody, welcome back to the Comfy Cozy Chill podcast. I'm your host Maya, and today I have a very exciting episode for you guys. I'm super duper excited about it. I'm going to be doing a review of Lore by Alexandra Bracken. So let's dive right on in. Let me get my notes pulled up here. I took real life notes today about the book itself, what it was about. Also, I wrote down actual thoughts and feelings that I had for it. So let me just grab those real quick. Here we go. So, what's the book about? The book is about this event that happens every 7 years called the Agon, and for 1 week, 9 gods and goddesses, Greek gods and goddesses, are forced to walk the earth as mortals and be hunted by the descendants of ancient Greek warriors and heroes, all eager to kill a god and take their power as their own. And why are they being punished, you asked? Because a really long time ago, they tried to go against Zeus and get rid of mortals in general, and Zeus was like, no, you can't do that, that's bad, no. So he created this punishment after 9 of the 12 Olympic gods tried to overturn him and destroy mortals, pretty much, like I just said. And let's talk about the 9 gods real quick before we go into the main character of the book. So the 9 gods that are being punished are Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love; Ares, the god of war; Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry; Hephaestus, he's the blacksmith god. He creates all the armor and the swords and all of that stuff. I think he's called the god of the forge, if I'm correct. Poseidon, the god of the sea and Zeus's brother; Artemis, the goddess of the hunt; Athena, the goddess of wisdom; Hermes, the messenger god, and I think he might also be the god of medicine. I don't really know much about Hermes. And then Apollo, who's Artemis's twin brother and the god of music and light, and maybe also medicine. I don't know, it's very confusing. So these 9 gods are forced to walk the earth every 9 years as a punishment from Zeus, who is the king of the gods, because they tried to overturn him, and he was like, no, you can't do that, bad. So after the last Agon, which was 7 years ago, Lore Perseous, it looks like Perseus, but it's not spelled the same way that Perseus is spelled in the Greek myths, so I'm not really sure. I should have looked it up, but Lore fled the city and the world that she had grown up in after the murder of her whole family, and she stayed hidden for 7 years using her skills that she learned training as a warrior from her childhood to make money winning fights and helping take care of Gil, this man who took her in after she ran away from home. In those years, she has turned her back on everything she once knew and pushed away any thoughts of revenge against the man, now a god, who she believes killed her family. So let's dive into that real quick. So our main character is Lore. She's a descendant of the warrior hero Perseus, who's well known for beheading Medusa. And side note, she's also a great grandfather of Percy Jackson in the Percy Jackson series, if I'm remembering correctly, and that's where Percy gets his name from. Side note. And 7 years ago, when she was about 10, I think, her family was actually killed during the Agon, the day after. So it was her mom, her dad, and her 2 younger sisters. And she didn't really know what to do, so she kind of just fled, she went and stayed with her mom's family, the house of Odysseus. And then after that, she ended up leaving there and just like coming back to New York City and like living in hiding. So she took care of this elderly man named Gil, who kind of like gave her a place to stay, gave her a roof over her head, some food, and then we learned that he has recently passed away and that he left everything to Lore after he died. So they have like a really special bond. He kind of like helped her heal in a way, and like, cause she doesn't really talk about what happened to her family. She kind of just like tries to let it go, tries to move on, cause she's out of this world. There's nothing that she can do now because the man that she thought killed her family is now reincarnate of Ares. So he killed I'm not sure if he killed the original Ares or the previous person who was Ares, but he's now Ares in a sense, the god of war, and is very like evil and powerful. So she feels like there's nothing really she can do to get revenge, so she just tries to kind of move on. So now, 7 years after that this has happened, the next Agon begins, and it's beginning in New York City, and 2 players of the Agon seek her out. Castor, her childhood best friend and training partner she thought to be dead from cancer, and the goddess of wisdom, Athena herself. And then Lore's kind of just thrown back into the ring as she saves and binds her fate to Athena in exchange for the chance to avenge her family and the chance to leave the Agon behind forever, because she is also the last of her family line. She's the last of the house of Perseus. So, and she's just like lost a lot from this world that she is like grown up in, she's born into, and she just wants to like get away and leave it all behind. So Athena actually offers her this chance if she will bind her fate to Athena's, make sure that Athena stays safe the 7 days that the Agon lasts. And so when they bind their fate to each other, if Lore dies, Athena dies, and if Athena dies, Lore dies, because they're like bound together. So they kind of have to keep each other safe or they'll die. And then, but this comes at a deadly cost, like I said, that if one dies, the other dies. And it still may not be enough to stop what's coming, which is the new god, the new Ares. He's like scheming behind the scenes and trying to be super duper evil, like we all thought would happen. Okay, so I talked about the Greek gods and goddesses. Let me tell you about some of the new gods. So let's dive into the gods real quick. Okay, so there's 4 new gods. So these are ones in the current Agon that killed either a previous reincarnation of a god or an old god and got their power. So there's Heartkeeper. He's from the house of Odysseus, and he has the power of Aphrodite. Excuse me. There's Wrath. He's from the house of Cadmus, and he has the power of Ares. There's the Reveler, who's from the house of Hercules, and he has the power of Dionysus. And then there's Tidebringer, who's actually a female, which was a big no-no, and I'll talk about that in a second. And she is from the house of Perseus, and she has the power of Poseidon. So, so the gods that are still alive are, at the beginning of the Agon, are the OG gods, are Artemis, Athena, and Hermes. Let me just go back to my book real quick, because it also tells you, so, not to like jump away from this, but it's also really nice because in the back of the book it tells you like the cast of characters. So it tells you all the gods, all the house, like each member from each house that is like mentioned or like even relevant to the story. So if you're ever confused, you can like flip back to that. And then it also gives you, at the very beginning, it gives you each house, so each living line and each dead line and each like what each who like each hero is a descendant from, like what their mark is if they have a like new god in their house, which I think is really helpful as well. So then if you ever get confused, because I got confused, you can flip back to that, or you can flip back to the cast of characters, which I did need the cast of characters. So yeah, the gods that are alive at the Agon are Artemis, Athena, and Hermes, and then no one knows what happened to Apollo during the last Agon. He's kind of just disappeared. No one's been able to find him. So then that leaves the gods that are the old gods, sorry, that are dead are Aphrodite, Ares, Dionysus, Hephaestus, and Poseidon. So yeah, that's all the gods. And then before I jump back into like so that first part was just like the description of the book, everything that happens, and then I'm going to talk about lore real quick. But before I talk about lore, I want to mention all of the bloodlines. So there's 5 bloodlines that are still alive. There's the house of Cadmus, the house of Odysseus, the house of Theseus, the house of Achilles, and the house of Perseus. And 3 of those 5 houses still have new gods within them. So they have a current god that they like serve and make sure they protect, and the god in turn helps them during the 7 years where the Agon is not happening. And then there's 4 houses that are dead or like ended. They don't have any descendants at all. There's the house of Meleager, the house of Bellerophon, the house of Jason, and the house of Hercules. And the house of Hercules actually has a new god, even though it doesn't have any descendants. So the Reveler, the Dionysus reincarnated, is the house of Hercules. And why that house is ended is because he went kind of berserk and killed everyone in his bloodline. So that's really fun. So yeah, that's kind of everything you need to know about the bloodlines, I guess, and kind of everything you need to know about the gods and goddesses. So I'll dive into lore real quick, and the house of Perseus and all of that. So lore comes from the Perseus I'm going to just say Perseus because I'm not really sure how it's pronounced. Perseus family, who's a descendant of the Greek hero Perseus, who is known for beheading Medusa, finding Mycenae, and saving Andromeda from the sea monster Cetus. Those are just some things he's known for in Greek myths, in case you're interested in reading about Perseus. He is also a child of Zeus, so he's a demigod. Let's see. I guess this is more about the family Perseus. So I also wrote, long ago, a female member of the Perseids took the power of Poseidon when she killed the god and became Tidebringer. Like I said, this is a big no-no because at the time only men were allowed to kill gods and take their power. As stated by Zeus in the speech that he made when he created the punishment. And what's interesting about this is that it doesn't actually say that only men. It's just implied because at the time, men were like the only ones who like went on epic journeys, were the only ones who got any credit and like doing anything pretty much, especially in myths, like hero myths we hear a lot. Women are just background characters or slaves or only there for sex. They're not really there for anything that goes with the plot. So it's kind of just implied that only men were allowed to take the power of the gods. So when Tidebringer took the power of Poseidon, she kind of put this target on the back of her whole house of Perseus, and they ended up killing all the bloodlines except for one, because long time ago Zeus gave the house of Perseus Athena's shield, the Aegis, as a way to help them in the hunt. So since he gifted that to them, only a member of the House of Perseus can wield its power, which calls to the power of Zeus. I think it can control like lightning or something. So only a member of the House of Perseus can wield the power. So they killed all bloodlines except for one, which is Lore's family, her great-grandfather, her grandfather, her dad, and then her. So yeah, all because Tidebringer took the power of Poseidon instead of letting the head of her house, who was a man, take it. So, you know what? Right on, Tidebringer. I respect you 110%, even though they killed every family line except for one in retaliation. And then in the story, the shield was stolen by a member of the House of Cadmus line when all the other House of Perseus lines were wiped out. And that actually becomes a plot point in the book as well, and kind of sets up the not really rivalry, but the going against between the House of Cadmus and Lore, because the leader of the House of Cadmus wants to marry Lore when she is 10 years old so that he can use her to wield this shield, which is so disgusting. But like if you know anything about Greek myths, when you think about it, again, women are just like treated as these like side characters, or just something to like one up. Like powerful women, they'll just marry them off to somebody because they want to like one up them and get what they have, even if it's money or power or like magic. It's honestly like really gross, especially when this like guy who's old enough to be her dad wants to marry her. That's disgusting. And he's like, I'm doing you a favor because you don't have any sons and the House of Perseus is gonna die out with your daughters, and it's just gross. Like, ew. So yeah. Going off, like while I'm on this tangent about how women are treated in Greek myths, I want to address this part that happens in the book that I really, really, really like loved. So I'm gonna bounce back to the Greek myth of Medusa. So, and it relates to Athena, who's the main goddess in the book because she's connected to Lore. So what happens is, like way long time ago, you know, before everything was how it is now in the world of Greek myths. So Medusa was actually she's a Gorgon, and she was mortal. She had two sisters who were immortal, and she was the only one who's mortal. I don't know if the Gorgon aspect is what gives her the ability to turn people to stone. I think it is, or if what happened to her is the ability to turn people to stone. I'm not quite sure. I tried to look it up, but couldn't find anything. So what happens is she's a high priestess of Athena, so she serves Athena in Athena's temple, and all of Athena's high priestesses are virgins. So what happens is Medusa's very, very beautiful. She's like very pretty, has very pretty hair, it's mentioned, and Poseidon, the god of the sea, sees her and is like, I have to have her. So trigger warning, sexual assault and rape. He rapes her in the temple of Athena, which is really gross, because he's like, I have to have her, and then he does that, and he like strips her of her entire life pretty much. So Athena sees this happening and is appalled what's happened, and sees the act as disrespectful towards her as a virgin goddess. But instead of punishing Poseidon for assaulting one of her priestesses, Athena punishes Medusa by turning her beautiful blonde hair into hair made of snakes and giving her the curse of turning those who look at her into stone and making her into a monster. So instead of punishing the person who's responsible for this, she ends up punishing the victim, and this is something that's very like controversial. Like, I think Athena, when you kind of think about it and you look at like her track record in Greek myths, I think Athena's kind of controversial goddess, because you would think as being a female goddess, she would be on the side of women, but she's not typically. She only ever helps like male heroes. She is known for punishing Medusa and Arachne by turning Arachne into a spider when Arachne proves to be better than Athena. So she just has this track record of like not really helping women and only helping men. So it is brought up by Lore in this book that, you know, you don't, like, what are you doing? You don't help men, or you do help men, you don't help women. And they get into an argument about it, and they bring up Medusa. And I thought this part was really interesting. Athena tells Lore that she was helping Medusa. And Lore's like, that's total bullcrap. And Athena says, hold on. She gave Medusa the ability to protect herself, the ability to harm those who wanted to harm her. And like I said, Lore's like, no, that's crap. And Athena says that men portrayed her as a monster throughout stories and art and history, and that wasn't Athena's intent. And like, that's kind of true. When you think about how like Greek myths are, is that they're carried down primarily through like men, because all the artists were men, all the storytellers were men, all the writers were men, because that's just how it was at the time. Women were just supposed to stay home and take care of the family, but not like contribute anything. So it made her a monster, made Medusa a monster, and that wasn't Athena's intent. And Athena wanted to make Medusa unafraid. And at this point we find out that Lore, during the 7 years that she was between Agons, was also assaulted by a man of high power in the house of Odysseus. And you know, Athena finds that out. Excuse me. And Athena tells Lore that if anyone should wield the Aegis that bears Medusa's face on it, it should be Lore, because she has seen the darkness of men and is not afraid. And to go back to Lore, that's a big thing with Lore. Like, she has gone through so many trials and tribulations, and she still continues to fight. She doesn't give up. She's not afraid. And I think that's really, I absolutely love that. I see that a lot happening now with books, especially Greek myth books, where they're giving women in the myths voices where they wouldn't have them in the original myth. They're turning them into their own characters instead of a side character. And I think Alexandra Bracken does that really well, where she takes the idea of a Greek hero and allows it to be a woman for once, to come out on top, to be her own character, to not need a man necessarily to like fight for her and take care of her. And like I said, I'm seeing that a lot more recently in like the past few years, with like Madeline Miller's Circe, 1,000 Ships by Natalie Hayes are just two that come to mind. So that was like kind of my favorite part of the book, because Greek myths is like a niche thing that I like subscribe to, and I listen to this podcast a lot where she gives a feminist take on like Greek myths. And when I read this book, I was like, okay, like, Alexandra Bracken, I see you. We're on the same page here. So I think that's probably my favorite thing about the book, is that she gives Lore her own Greek hero myth story, which if you read it, you'll see what happens. I don't want to tell you what happens. And she kind of, in a way, redeems Athena for me personally, when she's like, I didn't mean to turn Medusa into a monster, that was not my intent. Because in the myth I heard about Medusa, it sounds very like, it sounds pretty malicious. And I recently heard, like, in another podcast, this idea that she was giving her the ability to protect herself. And then I, like, remembered reading what I read in Lore, and I was like, okay, I have to talk about that when I'm talking about this book, because I think she does a really good way of bringing that idea into the story and giving us a different point of view on the myth. So I'm just gonna finish up telling you, like, what I loved overall with the book, and, like, kind of how it goes. So like I said, I love this book. I'm a big fan of Greek mythology, and that's really what drew me to this book. I did try to read one of Alexandra Bracken's other books, Passenger, like, back when it came out, and I just couldn't do it. I DNF'd it, but I may go back to it after reading this one. And I think part of it was that it, right from the beginning, you're thrown into, like, in Passenger and in Lore, you're thrown right into the Agon and into Lore's world, and it begins with the gods teleporting and awoken in New York City, and on the first day of the Agon, and Lore's being visited by Castor during one of her fights, and he's very cryptic. He tries to draw Lore back into the Agon, and she brushes it off, but once she gets back to her house, she sees that Athena's there, wounded with a knife stab. Sorry, I'm just reading this off my computer. And demands that Lore heals her. So at this point, this is when Lore and Athena bind their fate to each other. She questions why she's not participating in the Agon and finds out about Lore's family. And this is, like, you know, the part where Athena's like, I can help you. So all this happens within the first, like, 6 chapters. And that's a lot. That's pretty much what the inside flap of the book tells you. Just what I recounted very poorly is what the inside flap of the book tells you. So I was very confused on what was going to happen next, and it happened so quickly. Alfie, no. So I think that is something... No, come here. That's something that I was kind of, like I said, confused about, and kind of, like, put me off from it because it all happened so quickly. But about a third of the way through the book, I would say, it started to all make sense. Like, characters started to fall into place, plot points started to fall into place, and something that Alexandra Bracken does is she weaves the events of the 7 years ago that led up to Lore's family's death within the story as it's being told, and I think that is a great way to explain what happened, why it happened, and where Lore's at now. So I love that. Just trying to make sure I covered everything. So yeah, I don't know. I hope all that made sense. I'm kind of all over the place. Like I said, I wrote notes out for it. And I tried to, like, follow my notes as best I could, but, you know, once you start talking and you, like, I just get really excited about this stuff. So once I start talking, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm going to jump over here, and then I'm going to do this, and then this, and this, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I hope that made sense. I hope you can tell how excited I am about this through the audio, because through the whole entire video I've been smiling. But yeah, so that was my review / love letter to Lore by Alexandra Bracken. I think this is probably one of my, so far, top 3 books of 2021 that I've read / that came out this year. But I also haven't, I've only read like 10 books this year, and I think this is the only one I've read that actually came out in 2021. So yeah, that's really fun. I don't know. You can find the podcast on Instagram at comfycozychill_podcast. You can find me on TikTok at MK Schaefer. I'm working on trying to find something that relates to books to put in my username for TikTok so that people know that I post about books. So send me some suggestions. I'm on Goodreads. I'm going to put my Goodreads profile in the description below. You can follow my personal Instagram if you want. It's in the bio of the podcast Instagram. Podcast is available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, a bunch of other places, Anchor FM. And yeah, that's all I have for now, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you have anything that you would like me to read and review or talk about, send me a suggestion. You can comment on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send me a DM on Instagram. I'm sorry for my dog loudly drinking water right now if you can hear it. But yeah, stay comfy, stay cozy, stay chill, friends. Bye!